And Japan is marking 10 years since a devastating earthquake and tsunami hit its northeastern coast and triggered meltdowns at a nuclear power plant. 16,000 people were killed, 2,500 are still missing. Well, let's dig into this with Tom Burke. He's the chairman of E3G, a climate change think tank, and he joins us now from London. Tom, Japan's still clearly grappling with the aftermath of that disaster, but it's also a country that's very committed to expanding its nuclear program. I see the energy minister is saying that it's indispensable. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I think it was a great tragedy for the people of Japan. That's cost them an enormous amount of money, as well as left consequences that they're finding it increasingly difficult to deal with. They've still 10 years on got no strategy for cleaning the mess up. And it's quite clear that the Japanese people don't agree with their minister. They've continued to resist efforts to reopen all the other nuclear reactors in Japan that were shut down. And I think in any case, he's quite wrong, that it's really clear that the world doesn't need nuclear power either to meet its energy needs or to deal with climate change.
Well, I want to speak to you about that, because when it comes to combating climate change, a number of governments around the world are saying that nuclear is a critical part of moving away from fossil fuels. I see even the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, all of their scenarios, I believe, include nuclear power. Are there really any truly viable alternatives here?
Oh, yes, there are lots and lots of viable alternatives, but also very simple arithmetic shows you that you actually can't use nuclear power to deal with climate change, whatever other purposes you may have for it. There are about 400 odd reactors around the country. Most of them are about 40 years old or more. You simply could not build enough nuclear reactors in time to replace the ones that are going to go offline, let alone build new ones in order to drive fossil fuels out of the power mix. So it's simply very bad arithmetic to suggest you need nuclear power to deal with climate change. The existing nuclear power stations, all of the current ones, will one way or another close down over the next 20 years, which means nuclear will continue to play a role. I don't see any reason why we should change that. But it's not part of the future. It's, if you like, a future technology whose time has passed.
Tom, how are other world powers approaching this? I see at the National People's Congress in China that's just wrapping up in Beijing, China publicly stated it actually wants to expand its nuclear capacity here.
It's true. China's probably the only country in the world that's got a really consistent program of actually building reactors as opposed to talking about building reactors going forward. But even in China, with all its engineering skills, it's actually not been able to keep pace with what its original plans were, because it's so expensive to deal with, to build new nuclear power stations, and the engineering and concrete and steel requirements are so large. But China is, I think, a country that will probably do more to use nuclear power. But then if you live in an authoritarian government, you can't learn from the mistakes that other governments make. You can't learn from your own mistakes. So I think that's often just a feature of the politics of China more than anything else.
Tom, you talked about the economics of nuclear power plants as just not really working, not just the infrastructure, but also managing the waste. You say there are viable alternatives in terms of transitioning away from fossil fuels. What are they?
The alternatives are the ones we already know about. Renewables, wind and solar power, whose costs are continuing to fall through the floor, and also hydro. But the really important point to remember is that you need a different kind of electricity system, one that makes use of much more sophisticated technology with sensors and data management, so you get better use of and can deal with the problems of the variability of the solar and wind power, which, you know, don't blow all the time, but that's a problem that the industry is quite used to dealing with. So the electricity industry, it's a question of how you design your system, much more than which technology do you choose to use. And there's loads of evidence that it's perfectly possible for us to do that and to go for 100% renewables.
Tom Burke there, the chairman of E3G, a climate change think tank. Great to get your insights here on Al Jazeera. Thanks so much for being with us, Tom.
Thanks, Nadia.